Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Benjamin Cure Show on this Sunday, March 30th, 2025. What a week. Since we last spoke, LeBron James and Stephen A. Smith got into a public beef that boiled over into so many different things. Wendy caught some strays, or should I say like some direct shots, if anything. I want to talk about that. We have in the MLB, we have juiced bats now. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And from what it looks like, it's legal. And from what it looks like, it's here to stay. And I'll give you my thoughts on that honestly and transparently. And also, this is funny because now, when I do so many things outside of this show, I find ways to kind of link everything together. I went to a conference last week at the University of Miami, a sports law conference, and there were some great panels. And amongst other things, I got to learn way more than I already knew about NIL. And there's one particular quote that came out of that I wrote down that I genuinely cannot wait to share with you guys in both kind of awe and interest, because it shows you just how much more different NIL is in reality and in practice than it is in our actual heads and what we think NIL is. But first, let's talk about the Stephen A. Smith, LeBron James thing, because to me, it went from funny to ugly really quickly. So what's happened over the past month or so is Stephen A. Smith has gone at LeBron a couple different times, not really too different from what he'd done over the last 15 or so years of his NBA analyst career and over LeBron's career. But it started seeping into Bronny and him talking about how LeBron James as a father was putting his own son in a tough spot. And eventually it boiled over into LeBron going up to Stephen A. Smith the day, or the night, should I say, that Stephen A. Smith announces he's signing his $125 million contract with ESPN over the next 5 years. Congratulations to him. But by the same token, it was just a weird moment, and it was everything coming together at the wrong time. And that interaction boiled over. And I think Stephen A.'s first response on First Take the next morning was very classy. He said, "I feel like I know where LeBron is coming from. As a father, I totally understand." But then he went on this subsequent media tour when he felt like the internet was digging at him, and he started getting a little bit off the wall. And it led to LeBron James saying, "You know what? Checkmate. I'm going to go on your biggest friend / foe / competitor show, Pat McAfee, and I'm going to give the exclusive interview to him that I literally have not given to anyone else in my entire career," which is props and all the credit in the world to Pat McAfee. Goes on the show, is more comfortable than LeBron James has ever been. In my opinion, we have only seen that level of LeBron's comfort. We've only seen LeBron be that comfortable on the shop, and I think we see it in short spurts, and it's edited, so we don't know if we're getting the true raw version of LeBron and who he is as a person and what he actually thinks. Make no mistake, the interview with McAfee was not live. They aired it the next day because they filmed it that night, the night prior, because LeBron had a game the next day, but it was apparently, according to McAfee, and I trust him, uncut, and it was aired unfiltered, and LeBron was more comfortable than he's ever been, and he went in on Stephen A. Smith and in on Brian Windhorst, and it feels like LeBron James, for the most part, honestly, in my opinion, is the winner of public perception as of tonight, and I don't think it's a hot take. I think most people agree. Then him trolling Stephen A. later on that night with the meme of him boxing because of what Stephen A. Smith said, which I believe this one element of it is totally out of line. Stephen A. got on his feels, or was upset, after LeBron's interview on McAfee, and that night on his YouTube premiere show, on the Stephen A. Smith show, said that he was ready. If LeBron James would have put his hands on him, he was going to swing on LeBron. We got to calm down. There have been plenty of instances when reporters and analysts get into it over the years, both in writing, publicly, in press conferences, to say that you're going to swing on a guy, to say that you, Stephen A. Smith, are going to swing on LeBron James, takes everything totally out of context. That could have gotten really ugly really fast if they really wanted it to. And by they, I mean LeBron. By they, I mean Clutch Sports. By they, I mean the NBA. Because Stephen A. Smith is a credentialed member of the NBA media. If LeBron wanted to make his life a living hell and say, no, you know what, for my own safety, I don't want him to be on the sidelines of games, he could probably do that. Or he could probably say, I don't want him in the arena, or I don't want him within 150 feet of the court. He could do all these different things, I'm sure, and there would be legal precedent for it because of what Stephen A. Smith said. I've always said, so what I think the thing here is Stephen A. Smith going after LeBron, and then LeBron responding in what is, for LeBron especially, an unprecedented fashion, because LeBron doesn't really ever respond to anybody. LeBron is notorious or infamous or famous, quite frankly, because it should be looked upon in a good way, in my opinion, never ever called out Skip Bayless by name. never responded to him, never bought into the shtick. And even as a sports analyst or someone who is on the other side of that coin, the media, I admire the hell out of LeBron James for 20 plus years in the NBA, never responding to Skip, never acknowledging him, never mentioning his name, never giving him the importance that his shtick deserved. I respect the hell out of that. But Stephen A. taking it to the level that he did, and then saying that he would swing on LeBron because he didn't like what was said to him, I've always said on this show and to friends and other people, sometimes the comments aren't the nicest thing in the world. Sometimes they're not the most complimentary. Sometimes you guys go after me personally. Sometimes you guys respond to the takes. And I've always been pretty okay with it because the rationale in my mind, and I've heard other people say this over the years. I want to say Andrew Schultz is one of the people I've heard say it. And I totally agree with this methodology. If I am going to be someone in my own very minimized role, if I'm going to be the type of person that is willing to go on camera and willing to give my opinions, my critiques, my thoughts on games, on players, on their performances, and publicly share that and have you essentially digest my opinion, I have to be okay digesting the comments, the responses, the jokes, and the critiques about myself or my own takes. And I think that's fair game because if I'm going to claim that I have the platform to be able to talk about all these things, I have to be willing to acknowledge there's going to be other people who have a platform, whether that be social media or whatever else exists, to be able to respond to me, as long as it's not in a threatening way, right? And as long as we try to keep it above board, although it's always not. I've always been okay with that on my very minuscule scale. So for Stephen A. Smith, who has such a big audience, who has such a big following, both on social media and on linear TV, who's been doing this for a long time, who is no spring chicken when it comes to insults or maybe intimidations by other players over the years, to take it to the level that he did and seemingly not like the response from LeBron and now making it personal in the aftermath of this entire thing feels very out of character. Feels like Stephen A. took this one a little bit too much to the heart, and maybe easy for me to say because I'm not the guy sitting in the pocket in that moment, but like it got too far. I don't believe that Stephen A. Smith should have ever said that. I don't know if he'll apologize, but I do think that a few years from now, if he looks back on this, he'll be willing to say, as the first one who has always said, cooler heads will prevail. You know what? Maybe I did take it too far, or maybe he won't. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but it was a little too much. I think it boiled over in a very ugly way. I don't love the way that Brian Windhorst seemingly got caught up in the middle of all this, and I think Brian Windhorst had a very classy response, even if, Windy has had the right in certain instances, and I'm sure LeBron does feel like he's had the right in other instances, and maybe sometimes Windy has taken his analytic insider hat a little too far when he maybe didn't have that kind of information, or he didn't have that kind of perspective, or he wasn't as close as LeBron as he claimed to be. But it's gotten very ugly and it's boiled over. I enjoyed watching LeBron James on Pat McAfee. I enjoyed watching a little bit of the early response, but now, even though it feels like things have quieted and it's Sunday, so it's probably going to feel like I'm a little late to the story, it got a little too out of hand a little too quickly. And my opinion, once again, to just reiterate it quickly, has always been, if you're going to sit on camera and you're going to sit in front of a microphone and you're going to claim that your opinion should be listened to, or you're going to give people your opinion or your dialect or your thoughts or your critiques on players, teams, or performances or situations, you have to be willing to take it on the chin and be okay with the response that comes from those players or comes from those teams or comes from the sport or comes from the audience that you are putting your content out to. Feels like Stephen A. Smith lost sight of that a little bit. And it just feels a little weird because of all people, he should be the first one to acknowledge, admit, and understand what the game is and how the game is played. So with that, the New York Yankees are using what is being called redesigned torpedo bats this season. And it feels like it's out of a video game. We've heard the golden bat suggestions, and a lot of people scoffed at that, although I will admit, I thought it was pretty cool for a little bit there. We've seen how pitchers have been not allowed to essentially use the sticky stuff over the past few years. The pitch clock also, I think, while also cutting down on the game time, created there's an undeniable correlation last year, especially when you look at player injuries, or at least that first season of the pitch clock, pitcher injuries, because they don't have as much time to essentially relieve themselves in between pitches. But this one feels like a perfect combination of improves the game and doesn't affect the safety of the players or the game, and not the integrity either. people always say, joking around, like, you've got to let the guys start juicing again. You've got to let the guys get back on steroids because the steroid era was the best era of baseball. Many people have said that, and I've pointed to baseball's declining ratings and said, you're taking away pitchers' biggest advantage. You're not letting them use any sticky products anymore on their fingers. You crack down on it so much so, maybe even too much so, that now pitching is not as good as it's ever been. It feels like we've seen a decline in pitching and in RPMs and some of the best pitchers we've ever seen throughout the past couple of years, over the past decade or so. And now guys are not hitting as many home runs as we would have liked. Definitely not as many as the juicing era. But what if I told you there was an option where you're not affecting the player's health, you're not compromising the integrity of the game, you're not telling players to explicitly cheat, you're not letting them use sticky stuff, you're not letting them use performance enhancers on the other side of the things, on the other side of the plate, but we can also improve output here and make sure that the game gets a little bit more offensive. That's what Jazz Chisholm Jr. and Anthony Volpe are doing right now, because they have started using redesigned bats because their training staff, the Yankees training staff, realized you guys are swinging more so with the midsection of your bat, not with the end of the barrel. So if we can pack in the wood more so towards the middle part of the barrel, maybe you can hit this thing yard. In the first game, and I want to make sure that I get this right, in the first game of the season, Volpe and Chisholm Jr. both homered in yesterday's game, which saw the Yankees go yard 9 times. The Yankees broke their single game home run record in their first game with 2 of their players using these new redesigned bats. Yeah, that's something. And so I had an interesting conversation with some friends about this topic, and I'm the first one who's like very skeptical about major changes in a sport, but by the same token, you have to recognize when something is just an unbelievable opportunity, and maybe the MLB, who is dying for ratings, needs to buy into this a little bit, and I'll give some context about why I'm saying that in a second here, but to me, the MLB, because of the collective bargaining agreement and because of their process, cannot step out onto a podium now. Rob Manfred can't come out there within 24 hours and say the new torpedo bats are banned and no team can use them, especially not the Yankees, but teams in general cannot use this. It goes against the spirit of the rules and it's not in line with the integrity of the game. We don't want this. He can't do that because of collective bargaining and because of the due process that has to go, essentially the due process that has to take place behind the scenes of the MLB and of an internal investigation or study based on my understanding of the rules. They can't do that. Even if they could, I don't think they should. I think the torpedo bats and Jazz Chisholm and Anthony Volpe going yard, their first game using that, and the Yankees breaking their single game home run record within 1 game of using these bats, I think it's good for the game. I think massive changes are needed because you know what? With baseball's ratings seemingly having gone down over the last 10 years, year over year, you introduced this to the game. We're not saying you legalize steroids. We're not saying you bring steroids back. We're not saying you compromise the health and safety of the players behind the plate. We're not saying you bring back widespread cheating in the sense of let these pitchers use all the sticky stuff in the world and get their RPMs back up to 1 million. We're not necessarily saying that. What we are saying is, what if we can implement an equipment change that is going to result in more offensive production, which we already know based on analytics from other leagues, from the NBA, from the NFL, leagues that are succeeding right now are seemingly going up, especially digitally, in terms of digital analytics. On the digital distribution side of things, you know what? Maybe we should let this go through. Maybe we should say, this isn't banned. We're aware of the situation with the Yankees. We're not going to take this away from teams. And essentially, you're not saying we encourage it, but every other team is going to follow suit because, make no mistake, this is an added advantage for batters who use the middle part of the bat, which I'm sure is not limited to Jazz Chisholm Jr. and Anthony Volpe. And every team is going to catch on. And if every team does that, offensive production, specifically home runs and sluggers, are going to skyrocket across the league. And I don't know if there could be a better situation for baseball going forward in a season where it feels like everybody is dying, especially in the smaller markets, for baseball to be great again. I had the pleasure of being able to go to Marlins opening day. I went with my mom, and she graciously got us the tickets, got us great seats. I enjoyed the entire game from way before the first inning to the last inning. And in the end, the Marlins won on opening day against the Pirates, and I got to see a little bit of the all-star pitcher for the Pirates, the Cy Young winner last year. What you witnessed in that game was the love from Miami Marlins fans, a fan base that, yes, is very fair-weathered, but this almost desire and this excitement for baseball to be great down here in Miami once again. And I understand the MLB and Miami Marlins are not necessarily linear, but I can tell you this, based on social media, based on the people that I follow on Twitter that are more national, more so national than they are local, everybody just wants to be able to rally behind their favorite baseball team, and everybody wants an excuse to be involved in baseball again. And I feel like in Miami, specifically down here, we're dying for great baseball to be played, and it felt great to get a win on opening day/night. It was a Thursday game, a little before 5, so it was like beautiful day down here, perfect weather, perfect ballpark environment. But if there's anything I noticed, it's that people want baseball to be great. Nobody takes pride, at least I do not, in saying baseball is dying. You look at ratings, you look at ticket sales, you look at smaller markets, for example, like the Miami Marlins that are technically a big market, but for some reason we spend payroll-wise like we're a small market team. You look at ticket sales, you look at TV ratings going literally into the toilet, and then you see the Yankees say, you know what, for performance reasons, why don't we update these bats? You see the kind of game they have. You see the excitement and the buzz online. In my opinion, it is in Major League Baseball and Robert Manfred's best interest to not just let this slide, to let it play out, and maybe even, not directly, but by not banning it, encourage it, and let people really buy into this entire thing. So with that being said, I want to move on to our next story, because this one, talked about it last week, because I had a conversation about it, and I've heard things around the topic that I didn't like. And then last week, I had the opportunity to attend the University of Miami Sports Law Conference. The exact name is like their Global Institute of Sport Leadership. Great conference. I've been attending essentially every single year since I was about yay tall, since I was 13. And it's led to some of my best connections and some of the biggest moments in my sports broadcasting career. And every year that I go, I fall in love with sports once again. Not just the sports itself, but the operations and the business and the behind-the-scenes aspect of it all. This year, for like the second year in a row, that panel or that conference had a major NIL panel. Now, I don't want to get into the names too much, but maybe for the sake of the clip, I'll flash them on screen. But you had everything from people and CEOs running boutique NIL agencies to the guys running some of the biggest representation firms in the entire sports league and sports world. And you also had Katie Meyer, a former Division I women's basketball head coach, the former head coach of the Miami Hurricanes women's basketball team. And so I don't want to say exactly who said it on the panel because although it was public, I don't know if they want this necessarily attributed to them. But something that was said towards the tail end of that conference, amongst the many things that were discussed about NIL and transparency and how it's changed the game and what it really means and what it really does to teams and how it affects their timeline, how it affects recruiting, and how you really are, more so than ever, even though basketball was already one and done on the men's side of things, feels like every sport now, men and women, are recruiting on a one-and-done basis in a way that they never thought they would. But the quote that really got my attention was, in discussion of NIL and what it really is, somebody on the panel said this: brand deals are probably 5 to 10% of the space. I wrote down who said the quote there, but I'm not going to say it out loud in case they don't want to attribute it to them. But someone on that panel said, I'm going to repeat that, brand deals are probably 5 to 10% of the NIL space in 2025. Name, image, and likeness was supposed to be this revolutionary thing where players would profit off of, wait for it, I'm going to blow minds here, their name, their image, and their likeness. But brand deals, based on what we're being told by people who are representing these athletes and their NIL deals, are only 5 to 10% of the space. By the way, after hearing that and really thinking through it, I would be surprised if it is 5. I tend to believe now that more than 95% of the NIL space right now is not made up of brand deals, which means, Ben, what is it made up out of? It's not national TV commercials. It's not big-time brand spots or advertising spots for big-time brands utilizing athletes on a local level. That's not what it is. And maybe, to be honest, it was naive of us to even believe that that was the way it was going to play out in the first place. But what that tells me, and what I'm sure that reaffirms for so many of you out there, parents, players, young athletes, people who are just fans of the sport, is NIL is being leveraged as essentially the ultimate recruiting tool, which I am not breaking any news. But when you put it in the context of more than 95% of it is not based on brand deals, you start to realize that NIL is simply being leveraged as a bargaining chip to get players to go to certain schools. It is not because you're a great player. You know what? There's a risk of injury at this level, and we want to make sure that you're taking care of the day of tomorrow if you don't get to turn pro, or you don't get to turn pro in general, but you've got a big brand, or you're a likable guy in a small city. Here's a brand deal from Under Armour or Nike. That's not what's taking place in college. And maybe it was, like I said, it was probably naive of us to even think that that was the case in the first place. But the more that I hear from athletes, from coaches, from agents, from representation, from CEOs, from small boutique representation agencies, you realize NIL is not at all what we thought it was going to be. And so with the Supreme Court ruling, two major ones coming down within this month, I believe, of April. And we're not in April yet, but April's around the corner. It's literally on Tuesday. You start to realize NIL, after they implement the salary cap, which they did talk about in that conference as well, and there was so much great information that I simply don't have enough time to share with you guys, although I do invite you guys to look more into this subject on your own, because it is interesting. Once those rulings come down on salary cap and how schools are going to end up utilizing their funds and their athletic department's resources, NIL is going to become even more important because it's like the over-the-cap spending that is totally legal. And what we already know now is coaches, agents, current agents in big-time positions are acknowledging this is not coming from brand deals. This is not coming from Nike calling the kid and saying, hey, you're doing a great job. We want you to be on a national TV commercial. It's not even necessarily coming from small mom-and-pop shops in the area either. This is coming directly from, I would assume, and this was not said, but it's very easy to deduce this, large NIL collectives, alumni with large businesses. You don't want to say shell corps, but that feels kind of like the next step of this entire thing. NIL is not what we thought it was going to be. It truly is the Wild West. I do believe that players should be compensated, and I think it's a great thing for them, and I think this is long overdue in terms of legislation, but there do need to be guidelines, and there do need to be guidelines is the perfect word, and I'm going to leave it at that. And so with that being said, just wanted to share that with you guys because I was shocked when I heard it. That is all for this week's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got football. The NFL draft is around the corner. Can't wait to talk more about that. Maybe some NFL free agency deals that I really want to revisit that happened about a week or two ago. But you know what? The more I think about it, the more I'm like, man, I've got to digest this a little more, but I already have my mind made up on it. We can revisit all those things next week. But for now, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next Sunday.